What's going on, guys? What's up, man? I'm Paul. This is Pauling Theology's daily devotional, man. And this is with Trust in Jesus Ministries. And we are going through the scriptures, Genesis. We're in chapter 40, verse 9 through 16. Previously, we have talked about Joseph and how he's come to be where he's at. And right now he's in jail and he's talking to the baker and the cupbearer, the chief baker and the chief cupbearer in jail where he's at. And they asked him, or he asked them, he said, man, what's going on, bro? Why are you looking so bad? And they replied, it was like, man, we had some dreams. We can't interpret it. And then Joseph let him know that God is the ruler of dreams, that he understands and knows all things. And so he is going to interpret it for them. So if you haven't checked out 49 through 16, man, go ahead and read the scriptures, see what it has to say, stop the tape, you know what I'm saying? And then come back and we'll answer the questions, man. If you've already done it, if you've already read it, let's just jump on into it then, man. So let's see. The first question is what's going on? What's happening in the story? Well, this is the part where the baker, or I'm sorry, not the baker, but the cupbearer recounts the dream to Joseph. And he says in his dream that there was three vines. They had three branches, and the three branches had three buds, and then the buds produced grapes. And then he says he grabbed those grapes and that blossomed, and he squishes them into a cup. Then he hands the cup to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh drinks from the cup, man. And so Joseph tells him that the interpretation of this dream, he says that the vines or the branches are the 3 days, and in 3 days Pharaoh is going to lift up his head, and that he's going to be reinstated in the position that he was before, in his office that he had before as a cupbearer. And he's going to hand the cup to the Pharaoh again and actually be a chief of the cupbearers, his chief cupbearer again. And so after Joseph says this, he says, man, remember me when things go well for you. He said, remember me, man. He says, do this kindness to me and remember me and mention me to Pharaoh so that I can get out of this jail, get out of this prison, man. And then he goes further and he says, because I was stolen, I was kidnapped from a land of the Hebrews, man. And says, and even then, even here, I'm not even supposed to be here because I didn't do anything to get here. He says that they placed me in this jail. And the same word for jail is pit. It's like he moved from pit to pit, from the pit that he first talked about when he was in, his brothers threw him in, and then the second pit, whenever they have thrown him in there for supposedly trying to mess with Potiphar's wife. So what is this scripture saying about God? Well, God is the gift giver. And we talked a little bit about that last time, that he is the understander of all things, and so he can interpret dreams. But God has given this gift to Joseph specifically. So God is a gift giver. When we read in James, it says every good gift comes from the Father of lights. And that's the Father. That's Yahweh. That's Elohim. And so that's one thing that we can find from here, is that God gives gifts. I think when we went through Ephesians, we talked about this a lot too, is that Jesus in the same way gives gifts. He gives spiritual gifts. And so we'll talk a little about that in our application. What does this say about man? Well, man is under the dominion of God, under his sovereign rule over all things. The dreams that these men are having come from God. And that is why he can give the interpretation. And so the things or the actions that are supposed to happen, which we're going to see if they happen or not, when they do occur, it's because everything that we do is under the control of God. That God keeps a sovereign rule, a tight hand on his creation. But also, we should be confident in the gifts that God has given us. You see, Joseph could say, remember me when you go to Pharaoh, because he knows that what God has told him, the gift of his interpretation of this dream, is going to occur. And so he's like, dude, when this thing happens, when all of this comes to pass, man, remember me. Because Joseph has confidence first in God. He trusts God's interpretation, but also the gift that God has given him. He knows it's going to happen. So we should be confident. Man should be confident in the gifts that God has given us. And how can we apply these truths to our lives, that God has given us gifts and that we should be confident in them? Well, first we got to find out what our gift is. So I don't know if you've ever had a spiritual inventory or had a spiritual gifts test, or if you've gone through the scriptures and you've looked at what the spiritual gifts were to see what yours is. I know we talked a little bit about that in Ephesians, if you went through Ephesians with us, but that would be a great thing for you to do if you haven't done it yet, is to take a look and see what gifts that God has given you. What is the thing that you are talented at, or what is the thing that you have a passion for? What is the thing that you have a heart and long to do? And then the second thing, are you using them? Are you using these talents that God has given you? Are you using the gifts, the spiritual gifts that God has given you? And then third, do you have confidence in them? Do you have assurance in the power that God has given you to do those things? Because that's most important, is that not only do we know them and we use them, but we use them confidently because God has given it to us. God has given them. And if you know them and you're not using them, start doing it. If you don't know them, man, learn what they are. Figure it out. See how you can understand what the gift is that God has given you. I think I'm going to try and put a test in the show notes and in the description, so that way you can check it out to see what your spiritual gifts is if you don't know them. Hey, I appreciate you guys for listening, and we'll get on to the next dream and the finale. What happens if it all comes true here in the next episode.